That was extraordinarily moving, Chante. Thank you. Now, the Veterans for Peace will do their bell ringing ceremony.
And we're going to do this to conclude this beautiful day. And it turned out to be a beautiful day. And I want to thank each and every one of you who come out here on this day for showing up. Because that's the first step. This is a huge effort we have in creating a peaceful world. And the first step you have to do is to show up. And it may seem like an insignificant thing, but it's never insignificant. Because you never know who you're going to meet. You meet the most amazing people when you show up at these events. We do the bell ringing. I don't think maybe many of you have heard of our bell ringing idea, but it came out of at the end of the World War I, when this awful battle where 20 million people were injured or died, and it was just an awful bloodbath that lasted for years. And there's a constant going out into no man's land and getting gunned down type of warfare. And at the 11th hour, and the 11th month, and the 11th day, at that time was designated as the armistice, the truce. And at that hour, silence came over the battlefield, and soldiers from both sides got out of their trenches. They met in no man's land. They laid down their weapons. They exchanged souvenirs. They embraced, and they went home. And bells were rung all over the world. And these bells were jubilant bells, but they were also bittersweet because of the loss of so many people and how that ripple effect with the families and the loved ones. And so when we ring the bells on Armistice Day, it's done with a purpose to bring that consciousness of the armistice, of that consciousness of that bell ringing, and for people to reflect and remember. And instead of the guns and God and flag and patriotism that you usually see on Veterans Day, we're trying to bring that down into a more solemn remembrance so that we stop these continuous wars. And so we ring the bells at different occasions, like this wonderful occasion, and for Memorial Day, when one of our members has passed away, or some member of the peace community requests that we do a bell ringing, we do that, and especially on Armistice Day. And this bell we have here with me was hand cast by Chante, and it's absolutely a beautiful work of art. And we had 11 people who worked with a local sculptor to cast their own bells, and they all had their own different designs, and so whenever possible we get as many bells as possible. We got one here today, and Chante is with me, and so we'll do the bell ringing for you. You want me to hold it? It's really a heavy bell.
The next one's going to be 30 pounds.
She made it, so she has to hold it. But thank you. I also want to say Nabad, because that's Somali for peace. I know two words in Somali, Nabad and Midnimo, which is unity.
There's actually the Somali phrase, or the Somali saying that I'm doing good, or you ask them, how are you? They say, I'm doing good. It's Nabat Ya'ano, which means peace and milk. You have peace and milk.
And we share our office in Minneapolis. If you come down, we share with the Somali Yellow Pages, and we're in a heavy Somali neighborhood on the West Bank of Minneapolis. So if you're ever in town and you want to drop in and see our office, we're right there, and we reach out as much as possible. But and like you were asking that question, but it is an organic process, because you have to remember that these people, a lot of people are applying for citizenship, and it's really sensitive for them. It's really hard for them to become part of a demonstration or be political. They've jeopardized a lot for their families, a lot at stake. But thank you.
Thank you very much, David and Chante, for the beautiful bell ringing ceremony. Now this is the part of the fair where we turn the mic over to anyone who would like to speak about a peace or justice issue. Please, come on up if you have some thoughts on peace or justice issues that you'd like to share. Well, perhaps it's a little easier if I get the ball rolling myself. Now, I'm glad we had a great turnout today, and the weather turned out to be beautiful. I'm glad everyone's here. And I think it's good that we keep doing this, that we keep fighting. You hear people once in a while say, why are you still doing this? Why are you still marching in the parade? Why are you still protesting? Aren't the wars over? No, they're not over. The United States is bombing Iraq and Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and President Obama just sent 450 more U.S. troops to Iraq. They're building a new base in Anbar, so there's at least 3,500 as of right now in Iraq. There's 10,000 still in Afghanistan. Plus, not only that, but the United States is meddling all over the world. I mean, look at what happened in Ukraine. They overthrew a democratically elected president, and now you have a vicious civil war in Ukraine. Venezuela, they've tried to overthrow the democratic government in Venezuela many times, resorting to all sorts of tactics. Thankfully, they've not succeeded. So I think it's important that we continue speaking out. I mean, if you know something bad is going on, it's important to speak out. And wars are still going on. The imperialism is still going on. We're still spending trillions of dollars on the military. Trillions, literally, on the military and on war, on weapons. Money that could be used for health care. Money that could be used for education. Money that could be used for job training. To provide housing. Money that could help build our roads, our infrastructure. And so I think it's important, because if we're going to make progress on any of these issues, we need to end the wars. We need to bring the troops home, and not just from Iraq and Afghanistan, but everywhere. We need to shut down, as the late historian Chalmers Johnson called, the empire of bases. The United States has anywhere from 700 to 1,000 bases in the world. That's insane, and it's unprecedented. No other nation has that. That needs to stop. And we need to stop meddling in other countries' internal affairs. Shut down the National Endowment for Democracy, the Central Intelligence Agency, the State Department, like the USAID. Shut down these programs that are subverting other countries, and return to what our founding fathers, at least they talked about it, which was, taking care of things here at home. Non-intervention in the world's affairs, neutrality. I love John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams is my favorite president. And I'll tell you why. There's many reasons. John Quincy Adams went from being anti-slavery to being an abolitionist. And towards the end of his life, he even had some very advanced views about equality for black Americans. He also supported women's rights. In fact, had he not died, he would have went to the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, which is really the start of the women's suffrage movement. And John Quincy Adams opposed imperialist war. He was an opponent of the Mexican-American War. He gave a great speech, and I recommend, you can find it on the internet. July 4th, 1821, when he was Secretary of State, he said, "The United States does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher for people seeking freedom and independence everywhere, but the vindicator only of her own." And then he goes on to explain what would happen if the United States got involved in wars in Latin America or in Greece, where they were fighting, for independence from the Turks. What would happen if, even in these wars that you might think were wars of liberation, he said, well, basically, we'd be involved in conflicts where we don't know, what's going to happen, what the outcome of these conflicts will be, and at the end, we'll just be bogged down in one war after another, and then the United States will lose its soul, and we'll lose our freedom. It's a great speech, and it's so prescient, in 1821, so you're talking over 190 years ago, but it's like he could have said it today. So if we're going to make any progress on these issues, like I say, we have to dismantle the American empire, because that's what this country has been since at least 1898, an empire. And then we're going to have to go to work here. And the thing is, it's not pie in the sky. I mean, Larry can tell you, he's been to Nicaragua many times. Nicaragua is a poor nation, and yet it's a nation that is making great progress because the government there is focused on helping the people. They're making sure that every house has a roof and a floor. You know, children are getting immunizations, vaccines. You know, people are eating again. The school children have milk again. You know, there have been great advances made in healthcare. And this is what happened. And similar things are going on in Venezuela. Similar things are happening in Ecuador, Bolivia. I mean, this is what happens when countries focus on their own people. And I don't say that in a nationalistic, oh, we don't know immigrants. No, but they focus on what's going on in their own country. Because I believe in welcoming people here. I believe everyone should be welcome to the United States, but we need to focus our efforts on what's going on here to help people here. And then when it comes to international affairs, like I said, I think we should be neutral, and we should not be waging aggressive wars. And we should have good diplomatic relations with all nations, trade relations. I mean, President Obama is making a very tepid start to normalizing relations with Cuba, although who knows what his, you know, the real objective is. I'm sure they haven't given up on regime change. But the fact is there should be normal relations with Cuba, that, you know, trade embargo should end. We should be free as Americans to visit Cuba. You know, so that's what I envision. So, you know, I guess that's just kind of my piece on what I think we should be doing in this country. We should be, instead of wasting our money and wasting lives and killing people overseas, killing people here, hurting people. We have people in our community who are broke from PTSD. You know, their minds are broke, their bodies are broke. Instead of doing all that, we should end these wars, close the bases, dismantle the empire, and put all that money and those resources and dedicated people. Think of the scientists who work on weapons. You know, these brilliant minds who could be working instead on finding cures for diseases. You know, for instance, maybe we could make some progress fighting cancer or Alzheimer's or AIDS or multiple sclerosis. Maybe we could find more clean energy sources. That's what we ought to be doing in this country, instead of wasting money and, more importantly, far more importantly, lives. You know, it's going.
I just have something to add that bolsters your view about local. There's that old Lord Acton, power corrupts.
Absolutely, I love that.
There's actually a kind of a better statement that from Edward Abbey, power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. So if you think of how bad even city and, you know, Robin's city government and state government, as you go up, national, and now what they're talking about is global government.
That's right.
Like a one power. The power, the corrupting part of this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. Average people have a chance to make a difference. At least a better chance to make a difference on the smaller units of government. As you go up in this, where this global power, you have less of a chance of making a difference. So if you really understand how power corrupts, you're going to stick with putting more, not this idea of one world government and the idea that there's going to be some great benevolent dictator that's going to run the whole world. That's just the opposite. We should try to go for smaller governance on more local basis is what we should aim for. Of course, we're going in the opposite direction.
No, I agree totally with you, Colleen. I mean, it is true. I mean, the higher you go up in government, I mean, not that, I mean, Robin can tell you firsthand how tyrannical local government can be. I mean, some of the worst tyrannies can be found at the local level, and of course state government too. But it is true that the farther up you go, I mean, there aren't too many people in Congress who are like school teachers, like we have in the state legislature, or farmers, or small business people. I mean, most of them are millionaires. Most of them are very wealthy. And in order to be president of the United States, you have to either be very wealthy or be bankrolled. And of course, if you're bankrolled by the very rich, you're going to do their bidding. So you're right. I mean, you know, it makes sense, you know, to do things more at the local level.
Yeah, and this is about security when you're talking about, because diversity at a local level is like an immune system. You can prevent bad ideas that would happen at a big scale. So if you have failure at a big scale, it can wipe out a whole region like in a massive way. But if you have localism, decentralized, the risk factors are reduced.
And I'll just give you one more example. In the law, all of your Bill of Rights, your First Amendment, your Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, right against self-incrimination, they actually all had, even well before 9/11, built into an emergency exception. So an FBI agent could decide I'm in a life and death, and I can skip Miranda rights. Later on, there's accountability because he's got to justify this in court. That old system of the emergency exception working on the very bottom level actually works okay. Same thing with Fourth Amendment search and seizure. You can you can go into a house if they're destroying the evidence, but it's on one. What happened after 9/11 is they gave blanket authority, exactly your point here, this blanket authority from on high. It's an emergency after 9/11, no more complying with the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. That is the absolute, we always had exceptions, but they were based on individual, very low level. And then there was a backup for it, which is in court, you had to explain why I thought they were destroying the evidence and I didn't get a warrant, etc. And then, of course, after 9/11, Bush said, no more law, we can have an that's actually also, by the way, Carl Schmitt, the architect of the Nazis, used what they called the emergency exception in large scale. That was actually his whole, and some of the professors now in the law schools are saying, we should really reread Carl Schmitt. That's really a good idea. This guy who made up a large-scale emergency exception for all law. I mean, that's where we're at. And these are like well-known law professors.
No, Colleen, you're absolutely right. You made that same point yourself 2 years ago at the Central Minnesota Peace Fair in Kiwanis Park. You said that the exception has now become the rule because of people like John Yo, because of Alberto Gonzalez, you know, and their ilk that made these changes, unconstitutional changes, illegal, immoral changes. And, you know, I mentioned, I think when we, you know, in the question and answer session, I truly believe in this country. And I've mentioned this at many BACP meetings. I've talked about it with my father. I've talked about it with many people. There needs to be accountability. Just like we've said when it comes to police brutality, that this will end. The police brutality will end when police officers start being held accountable. When you start seeing police officers who use excessive force or who murder people, when they start being tried, they start being convicted, and they start serving long prison sentences, police brutality won't go away completely, but it will greatly diminish. If people, and the next police officer will be like, well, boy, maybe I'll be going to jail for the next 20 years if I murder someone, or maybe I'll be doing a good 5-year sentence if I beat the crap out of someone who I shouldn't have. It's the same thing with this, you know, these aggressive wars and the torture and the abuses. These folks need to be held accountable. I don't know if it ever will be, but they need to be held accountable. There need to be trials. If there's ever to be justice, it's like, have you ever seen Judgment at Nuremberg? There's a scene in Judgment at Nuremberg where one of the defendants, Herr Janning, played by Burt Lancaster, says if Germany is ever to recover from what happened in the Nazi year, we need to hold ourselves accountable. And that is true. And this is not necessarily pie-in-the-sky talk, because this has happened in some of the Latin American countries, like in Bolivia, and Argentina, and Chile, and you know, in Uruguay. I mean, they're dictators. Jorge Videla died in prison 2 years ago. He was a dictator back in the 70s in Videla, a ruthless tyrant, murdered a lot of people. So yeah, there needs to be accountability. But I think before you can get that accountability, of course, we need to have a radical change. I mean, we need to dismantle the empire bases. We need to end these wars. We need to stop squandering trillions of dollars, interfering in other countries' affairs. And in my opinion, maybe not everyone agrees with this, I think we need to do a fundamental, you know, rethinking of our economic system. I honestly don't think we'll get this with our, you know, capitalist system. That's my honest opinion. You know, I'm a socialist. But however you may see it, we definitely need to make those changes when it comes to our foreign policy and our military. And then we need to hold these people accountable. I mean, people like Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Rice, Paul, and for that matter, President Obama, Vice President Cheney, Samantha Power, Susan Rice, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry. I mean, we can go on and on and on. Did David betray us? These folks need to be in prison, quite frankly, after a fair trial. You know, they need to be held accountable for their actions. Sure.
Just a little bit aside, I just want to make a comment on some comments that were made about power corrupting. I have a little bit of a different opinion. From my experience in Nicaragua, I know people in Nicaragua who are fairly close to high up levels of government. Our friend Paul, that's been here several times, you know, is translated for the president. I have a friend who's a reporter for an independent radio station who, you know, knows the president, high up people in the government. And I know other people in the government and who have contact with the government. In Nicaragua, the higher up you go in the government, the less corrupt it is, and the more integrity people have. And it's a wonderful phenomenon. These are people who are dedicated to serving the people. So I just don't want us to get so cynical to believe that power always corrupts.
What do you attribute to that?
A movement that was based in the historical struggle of the country to oppose U.S. imperialism. The U.S. occupied the country militarily for a couple decades and then left a dictatorship in charge, which they supported until the revolution in 1979. Well, the tradition of this movement is service to the people. And like, for instance, I have great respect for the president, Daniel Ortega. I think he's an amazing leader. And when you're in Nicaragua, you can just feel it. Like when people talk about the president, it's like they're talking about their brother-in-law or somebody, you know, or the next door neighbor. And I just think that corruption is not absolutely necessary to human beings. There are people who are, I personally have a great respect for Muammar Gaddafi, who the United States finally got murdered after 3 decades of trying. That he was a man that they tried to corrupt over and over again. He could have sold out the oil and stuff, but he stayed with the people. Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, I had the privilege, this is a campaign hat from Hugo Chavez's last campaign. He was elected president, unfortunately died of cancer a couple years later. The man was absolutely incorruptible. I mean, I was in the streets at his last campaign rally. 3 million people were in the streets. And all these people wanted peace. 3 million people together who wanted peace and who talked about love. That's another thing. In Nicaragua, the government talks about love. They talk about love all the time. The president's wife, who's the official spokesman, talks about love all the time. I listened to a speech by a valedictorian of a graduating police class, and the man talked about love. I went to a speech by a presidential advisor. It was the closing of the campaign during the municipal elections. And he was just a very unassuming guy. I didn't even realize he was the speaker coming in. And he gave a speech and he said, "We're trying to build a society where people are free to love each other. It's very hard work." So, I mean, I think if there are some people in the world who are motivated by love, commitment to the people. So we're not always corruptible. I just wanted to throw that in there.
I think those are excellent. I think those are excellent points. But you know, when you talk about Nicaragua or Venezuela, those are really normal countries. They don't have a big empire of bases overseas. They don't wage wars all the time like the U.S. does. You know, they're at peace with their neighbors. They're at peace with the world. You know, whereas the U.S., you become president of the United States, you have this awesome machinery at your disposal. You know, you have the biggest military in the world, you have the most sophisticated weapons, you have bases all over the world, you have this intelligence apparatus at your disposal. And unfortunately, when you have that type of, you know, it would take an extraordinarily brave and honest, you know, person to not want to use that, to want to dismantle it, to say, I don't want this, I want to get rid of it. And unfortunately, we haven't found that person yet. You know?
We have a society where money is God.
Oh, Senator Wellstone? So, yeah, absolutely.
The one thing I would like to leave with everyone, just this thought, and that thought is, until we can make peace profitable, we will continue to have wars because the military is profitable.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the arms industry is profitable.
That's right.
So unless we can take profit out of the equation and put love and peace and justice in that equation, we won't have it.
You're absolutely right, Letha. Absolutely right. Letha's absolutely right. You know, I mean, the whole reason these wars are waged is because they're profitable. I mean, Smedley Butler put it perfectly in War is a Racket. I mean, this is 1935. He wrote this pamphlet back, 80 years ago, but he could have wrote it today. He really could have. And he said, if you want to end wars, the number one thing is to take the profit out of wars. And he had recommendations to do that, like when there's wartime, everyone would receive the salary of a private. And he talked about what they were getting paid. It was very, very little. He also advocated, a referendum, national referendum on war. He also believed very much that the United States military should be restricted just here at home. There should be no bases overseas, that there should be a small Coast Guard, a very small military, basically just to defend the country in the very remote likelihood of a foreign invasion. But so Smedley Butler made that very same point. You got to take the profit out of wars. When wars are no longer profitable, very few wars will be waged. Would anyone else like to come up to the mic and speak?
Another song? All right, you guys. Okay, I'll sing a song. I think I'll end a song. I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road. I asked him, where you going? This he told me. I'm going on down to Yazga's farm. Gonna join in a rock and roll band. Gonna camp out on the land. Gonna try to set my soul free. We are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Can I walk beside you? I've come to lose the smog, and I feel to be a cog in something turning. Maybe it's the time of year, maybe it's the time of man. I don't know who I am, but I know life is for learning. We are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. When we arrived at Woodstock, we were 500,000 strong, and everywhere there was song and celebration. I dreamed I saw the bombers riding shotgun in the sky, turning into butterflies above our nation. We are stardust, billion-year-old carbon. We are golden, caught in the devil's bargain, and we've got to get ourselves, back to the garden.